Pagan Ireland, pre-Christian Ireland, two expressions which conjure up many different pictures. What was Pagan Ireland actually like? It brings to mind visions of druids, standing stones, ancient tombs, mythology, and gods and goddesses. How accurate is this vision? Many believe in Pagan Ireland there was a strongly organised belief system, one with clearly defined and never-changing beliefs, and a fixed number of gods, including Lugh, Brigid, the Daga, the Morrigan, etc. Others might have a more negative view, seeing it as something primitive, as poor, in a way as waiting to be transformed by Christianity. Pagan Ireland is also something many people claim to know a lot about. It's easy to find loads of videos on it. 90% of these are in English, of course. There are even more books on the subject. Some of these are interesting, especially when the authors can read the original source material and have done proper research. Others are unfortunately very weak, as they are based on second or third hand accounts, or just made up. Unfortunately, our knowledge of this area is hindered by ideas that emerged in the Victorian era, or in the last century, ideas which have become common knowledge. One example is the idea that the Celtic or Gaelic people believed that around Samhain there was a thinning of the veil. In other words, the barriers between this world and others were weakened. There's no evidence of this in the sources. Indeed, it has been proved to have been a Victorian invention. Unfortunately, around Halloween, this idea increasingly appears everywhere. Another idea is that Saint Brigid is a goddess. This also dates from the Celtic revival at the end of the 19th century. However, the top prize in inventiveness has to go to the infamous potato god of Ireland. Google this. It is from pre-internet days, but if you need a laugh, investigate it. Second place is the myth of snakes and the massacre of pagans by St. Patrick, which we will return to below. In this video, we are going to explore pre-Christian religion and beliefs in Ireland to unravel some of the confusion, cut through the fluff that has built up over many years, but also to identify the many mysteries. This is perhaps the most important thing, to acknowledge that we do not and cannot know everything. It is easy to identify erroneous ideas, but to build up an accurate view of pre-Christian Ireland is exceedingly difficult. Anyone arguing the opposite needs to return to the library and start learning Old and Archaic Irish and its predecessors. Pre-Christian or Pagan Ireland is such a vast area that I have no intention of being exhaustive here. Rather, this is an initial video introducing the topic and will be completed by other videos in the future. It is perhaps appropriate to start by looking at the terminology. While the word pagan is widely used, it is perhaps not the best word. Its origins are a little obscure and argued over in academia. Nonetheless, it does seem as if it was applied by early Christians to non-Christians in a negative way. However, although it was initially pejorative, in recent decades it has been widely adopted, especially in the self-styled pagan community. Like other words, what was originally close to an insult or an actual insult was adopted and claimed by the group it was applied to. An alternative expression that is widely used, especially in the academic area, is pre-Christian. While this is more correct and lacks any pejorative tones, it is nonetheless rather clunky. Pagan is easier to say and is probably more accepted. I will use both pagan and pre-Christian here. Second, it's important to state that like any social activity, religious beliefs and activities change over time. While this is an obvious statement, it has to be constantly restated when talking about history. For an example of social change, look at Catholicism or Christianity in Ireland. In the more or less 1500 years it has been in Ireland, it has changed dramatically. Look at Irish Catholicism in 500, in 1000, in 1500, 1800, 1900, 1950, and today. So much has changed. One small example is patterns. In the 18th and 19th century, and the 20th century to a lesser extent, they were a very important local expression of belief centering around holy wells, often involving large crowds, festivities, alcohols, and the difficulties associated with this. Nowadays, if they take place, they are much reduced in size, with the festive elements especially being dramatically reduced. The same goes for pre-Christian Ireland. Religious beliefs and practices must have changed many times during this period, which stretched for thousands of years. Focusing just on one particular part, on Gaelic Ireland, which is what most people mean when they talk about Pagan Ireland, this is a period of approximately 1,000 years before the arrival of Christianity. Gaelic religious beliefs were not the same at the beginning of the Gaelic period in, say, 600 or 500 BCE, as they were in 100 AD, or even in the 5th century when Ireland began to Christianize. They would have changed, influenced by previous religious beliefs, by those of others they came into contact with the Romans being important here, by social changes, and by particular events. It's interesting to make a diversion here and look at the work of Ronald Hutton on paganism in Britain and Ireland. In his studies of Roman Britain, he shows a number of important things. First, the flexibility and complexity of the Roman religious system. This involved far more than a fixed number of gods such as Jupiter, Mars, etc. Rather, there seems to have been an almost infinite number of gods, ranging from Jupiter to more personal ones. Second, this system was malleable, open to new belief systems. The cult of Mithras is an obvious example here. Third, the belief system in Britain before the Romans and during the Roman period also had a large number of supernatural beings, whether they were called gods, spirits, or other names. In other words, while some writers try to reduce religion in what can be called pre-Roman or possibly Celtic Britain to a small number of gods, much more than this was involved. Moreover, based on the archaeological evidence, many of these would have been local gods or spirits, with belief in them being restricted to certain areas. There is no reason to think that Gaelic Ireland was very different in its religious structures. First of all, although it was peripheral in relation to Western Europe and the Roman Empire, it was not isolated or cut off. There were many interactions between Ireland and the Roman Empire, involving trade, war, and the exchange of ideas or beliefs. Christianity was the most successful Roman belief brought into Ireland, but it would have not been the only one. Somewhat tentatively, I would also say that the exchange of goods and ideas was not only with Roman Britain. It is possible that traders, or others, reached Ireland from Gaul and Iberia. Gaelic Ireland, thus, would probably have had a very complex religious structure, with a wide range of supernatural beings, whether gods, types of spirits, or even beings such as the Tuatha Dé Danann. Many of these would have been localized. Others would have been more widespread. Here we can tentatively identify gods such as Crom Crua or Anu. However, how these were conceived, idealized, ritualized, prayed to, or worshipped would have constantly changed. Now we must turn to the Celtic question. Some writers believe that the Celts, by whom they mean the people of Gaul and other parts of continental Europe, as well as Britain and Ireland, shared the same gods. The names of these gods might vary slightly, but they were the same deity. To cite one example, Mythopedia on Lugh, quote, Lugh was one of the most prominent Celtic deities, appearing in Britain and the European mainland as Lugus. Julius Caesar identified Lugus as the Roman god Mercury, a trickster and messenger of the gods, similar to Lugh's role before he became High King. He shared several attributes with the Norse deity Freyr. End quote. I'm going to be controversial here by questioning this link between Lugus and Lugh. It is important to do so. First, the sources and evidence are from two completely different periods. Julius Caesar and other Roman authors provide evidence that is often dubious about religious beliefs in Gaul and Britain from the pre-Christian period. Some of these writings have been backed up by archaeological evidence, others not. On the other hand, Gaelic sources about Lugh were all produced in a Christian universe several hundred years later. This makes understanding Gaelic pre-Christian beliefs very difficult, as some things that to a 21st century audience may seem pagan can actually be strong Christian references. Elvira Johnson points out that the fire imagery in Gaelic texts, nowadays seen as evidence of paganism, had a Christian meaning related to the Pentecost and the fire of the Holy Spirit. Second, similarity of names from two different epochs and in different cultures does not necessarily imply that there was a relationship between the two. It happens that I believe that Lugh and Lugus are probably connected, but this is not always the case. The next point is that the interpretation of sources is vital. This includes understanding the context in which texts were produced and the context in which influential interpretations were made. The magnificent corpus of Gaelic literature, whether mythology, stories about saints, poetry, or lore tracts, was produced in a Christian context. While Irish Christianity undoubtedly incorporated pre-Christian beliefs, imagery, and sites, it also incorporated Christian beliefs, and more specifically, Christian ideas or ideology from the early medieval period. For example, the stories of the Milesians patently copied off the story of Moses to give the Gaelic origin legend a biblical basis. This was something done all over Europe. At the same time, it probably incorporates pre-Christian Gaelic stories. In relation to the interpretation of sources, the Victorian period has left us with a blurred vision of the past, thanks especially to views of mythology similar to Fraser's The Golden Bough, which overemphasizes the pagan to the detriment of the Christian. In Ireland, many Anglo-Irish writers around the time of the Celtic Revival helped produce a blurred and misleading view of Gaelic religious beliefs. Indeed, as Elvira Johnson points out, the idea of Brigid as a goddess dates from this time. She also shows that the only real evidence of a goddess or supernatural being called Brigid comes from Sanus Cormac's, quote, generally interpreted as a creative etymological text rather than being historically accurate. For example, its story of Mug Emi, the first lapdog in Ireland, whose ownership causes conflict and jealousy among kings, is not treated as being literally true, end quote. She also adds that the evidence of the real Brigid, i.e. the saint, is much more compelling than the goddess. Based on the above, I must ask a difficult question, one that may seem crazy but needs to be asked. Was Lugh regarded by the Gaelic as a god? He was undoubtedly a powerful figure, supernatural and non-human in a way, but he was not all-powerful. He may have been the leader of the Tuatha Dé Danann, but that did not necessarily make him a god. Indeed, what these beings were varies in different texts. For example, in Cot Fionn Trá, the Battle of Ventry, the Tuatha Dé Danann are shown living alongside the Gaelic Irish and intermarrying with them. The corpus of Gaelic texts is large, and the stories told in them vary considerably, illustrating how beliefs and indeed mythology changed over time. Lugh was a legendary figure. He may have been descended from gods, as many heroes were in Greek and Roman mythology, and other Irish heroes also were, but that does not necessarily mean he was a god. It could be that he was regarded as the leader of a non-human group, but not too different from the humans, kind of like Tolkien's elves, and yes, I believe that Tolkien bases elves on Gaelic mythology. To finish on Lugh, I also believed that how Lugh was seen changed considerably. It could well be that originally he was a god, even Lugus, but over time he was transformed. As all heroes, mythological figures, and indeed real historic figures are. Moreover, this transformation did not end with Christianity. Rather, it continued, and continues to do so in the present day. Now, I must move on to a central question of this video essay. Given the evidence we have about pre-Christian Ireland, can we get an accurate and complete picture of religious beliefs and practices from it? The answer will vary depending on the historical period. We have a lot of written sources related to the pre-Christian beliefs of Gaelic Ireland, but not much archaeological evidence. Moreover, even some of the archaeological evidence can be interpreted in various ways. Here, I'd like to reference Ronald Hutton again. In his book, Pagan Britain, and in various lectures, he has outlined his reinterpretation of the traditional picture of Lindo man as a victim of human sacrifice. He makes a compelling argument that this was not a case of human sacrifice. Moreover, his form of analysis could also be applied to the Irish bog bodies, many of which are presumed to have been human sacrifices. In relation to the period before Gaelic Ireland, the picture is reversed. No documentary sources, but a lot of interesting archaeology. The latter includes the large passage graves of Newgrange, Knowth, etc., stone circles, burials, stone rows, and many smaller constructions. While we can gain a lot of knowledge from these, such as that the builders of stone circles and stone rows in Munster had a good knowledge of astronomical events, including multi-year lunar cycles, we have to be careful in our interpretations. Not all constructions would have been built for religious or ritualistic reasons. Indeed, many, if not most, would have had multiple reasons or uses. Furthermore, while many megalithic monuments were oriented by astronomical events, they were also at times willing to adjust their constructions to align with the landscape, particularly with mountains. The importance of sacred mountains is something I will do a video on in the future. It is a very interesting topic. To answer the question I posed a couple of minutes ago, can we get an accurate picture of religious beliefs and practices in pre-Christian Ireland from the various forms of evidence? The answer is no, but. While we have evidence from the pre-Gaelic period that points to a belief in the supernatural and the importance of the astronomical bodies, we cannot know for sure what they believed and how they practiced. However, we can make very good suppositions. We can have a good idea of some of the elements of their religious practice, but we do not have any idea of the names they gave to their gods or spirits. In Gaelic Ireland, there is little evidence about practice. Even the existence of the druids is questionable. Again, this is something I will return to in a later video. For now, it's enough to state that all evidence of Irish druids in the sources occurs after Christianization. Importantly, all the texts were written after the Gaelic Irish had adopted the new religion and come into contact with the substantial Roman Greek literature in which the figure of the druid existed. Moreover, there were substantial beliefs and prejudices attached to this figure, which were then applied to the Irish context. Undoubtedly, there were people who fulfilled a religious role, perhaps linked with other functions. Were these druids in the Gaulish sense or in the British sense? Possibly. We just do not know. As I said, this will be returned to in a future video. At the same time, there is considerable evidence of pre-Christian beliefs. Some can be found in place names such as the Paps of Anu, references to Crum, others in texts. There's much more references to non-human beings and some gods such as Man and Maclear. However, as I've emphasized, how these gods, spirits, or beings were seen, how religion was practiced, undoubtedly changed over time. Moreover, drawing on evidence from Roman and Iron Age Britain, there would probably have been a multitude of spirits and gods, some covering the whole country, others more localized. Some may only have been found in a particular well or river or lake. Others would have been more powerful. I also feel, and I must emphasize that this is just a feeling, that the religious organization that existed in Ireland during the Iron Age was probably not extremely structured and definitely not centralized. Like the political system, it was probably very localized and fragmented, lacking a social hierarchy. This may explain how Christianity spread so easily in Ireland. I think it's important here to make a final diversion before ending. While it is necessary to acknowledge what we do not know in relation to Pagan Ireland, it is also important to point out what is demonstrably false. Most important here is a ridiculous belief that the story about St. Patrick driving out the snakes, which probably only dates to the 12th century, hundreds of years afterwards, really represents the mass murder of pagans. A genocide, according to some. This is completely made up. It's now time to close this video. I will be making others related to it in the future, so stay tuned. As I've said, it's important to acknowledge that we cannot know everything about pre-Christian Ireland. Some things can be found out with a lot of research, scratching through the sources, as I like to say. However, there's so much that we will never know. Given the time of year, I think that Patrick Kavanagh's poem, Advent, explains it best. And so I'll close the video with the first verse of this lovely poem. We have tested and tasted too much lover. Through a chink too wide there comes in no wonder. But here, in the Advent darkened room, where the dry black bread and the sugarless tea of penance will charm back the luxury of a child's soul, we will return to doom the knowledge we stole, but could not use. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. This video was a little controversial. Please leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. Also, you can help supporting the channel by donating to me to my Buy a Coffee account. The link is in the video details. Slán live agus go raibh maith agaibh.